Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to discuss about the topic infection and infectious processes. The infection in this topic, we are going to discuss about the definition of infection, classification of infections, sources of infection in man, methods of transmission of infection, what are the factors predisposing to microbial pathogenicity, and what are the different types of infectious diseases. The term infection and immunity are very important terms in clinical microbiology. When you study microbiology, basically you should know what is infection, what is a disease, and what is immunity of our body. All these terms are very important. The term infection and immunity are as a result of the interaction between the host and the infecting microorganism. Every host has an immunity, and if the immunity of the host is lowers down, then only the microorganism can attack on the host and can cause the infection. Basically, on the basis of a relationship between the microorganism and the host body, microorganisms are divided into two groups. These are saprophytes and parasites. The first is saprophytes. These are the free-living microorganisms that can survive on dead or and decaying organic matter. And the second one is parasites, which are the microbes that can establish themselves in the host and are able to grow and multiply in the host body. These parasites are of two types. These are pathogens and the commensals. Pathogens are the microorganisms which are able to produce disease in a host cell, and the commensals are the microorganisms that live peacefully in the host without causing any infection or disease. They are harmless. They do not cause any kind of infection or disease in our body. Now, the host body has a large number of commensals, and many commensal microorganisms act as facultative pathogens. And let's see what are these facultative pathogens. They are the normal microflora of the host. They live in the host without causing any harm to the host. But once the immunity of host weakens, they can cause a disease or host. These type of pathogens are known as facultative pathogens. Now, there are two important terms. One is infection and other is infectious disease. Infection and infectious disease. Let's see what is the definition of infection. Infection is the lodgement and multiplication of organism in or on the tissue of host. There are different types of infection. The infection, in the infection, the parasite invade the cell and infect the cell. Basically, there are mainly of 10 types of infections. Let's start with the definition of all these infection. First is primary infection. It is the initial infection with the organism in a host. When the host cell is primarily or initially infected by a parasite, it is known as primary infection. Next is reinfection. Subsequent infection by the same organism in a host after recovery is reinfection. When the host cell gets subsequently infected by a same parasite is called as reinfection. Subsequently infected by the same parasite. Once the host get infected initially by a parasite, then it recovers, and after some time again the host get infected by the same parasite and result in infection. Next is superinfection. Infection by the same organism in a host before recovery is superinfection. Then secondary infection is when in a host whose resistance is lowered by pre-existing infectious disease, a new organism may set up in infection. That is secondary infection, the infection in which host cell has low immunity due to pre-existing infectious disease and gets infected by a new parasite is known as secondary infection. Next is Focal infection. Here, the infection occurs at a localized site, such as a particular organ or part of a body, but it shows generalized effects of the body. That here, the condition were due to infection at localized sites, such as appendix and tonsils, and it causes general effects. Such infections are known as focal infection. Next is cross infection. When a patient already suffering from a disease and new infection is set up from another host or external source as cross infection. Then nosocomial infection. It is also known as hospital acquired infection, and it is infection. It is a type of cross infection occurring in the hospital. Then iatrogenic infection is physician-induced infections, and the infections occurs in during therapeutic procedures. Is known as iatrogenic infection or physician-induced infections. Then endogenous and exogenous infections. Endogenous infections caused due to the presence of an infectious agent that is already present in the body, but it will not, there is no symptoms which are asymptomatic, is called as endogenous infection. And the exogenous infection are the infections which are coming out from the coming outside of the body of the host, is known as exogenous infection. Then subclinical infection or inapparent infections are the infections where clinical effects are not apparent. Then latent infections, infection in which some parasites which can result in an infection resides in a tissue in a latent or hidden form, and it produces a clinical disease when the host resistance is lowered. And such infections are known as latent infection. That means the infections remain in the tissue in a hidden form, producing disease when host resistance is lowered. Now, this was all about infection and different types of infection.